Okay, KTM Adventure R 890 owners. This is my semi-new 2023 KTM 890 Adventure R that I was just wanting to go over a few things on there to hopefully keep you from spending the same amount of money I've spent trying to make this bike decent. It is better than decent now. I would say it's a great bike now, but I've had to do a lot of work to it to make it a great bike. Start out with the seat. The seat that comes on these bikes are, in my opinion, absolutely hideous. It's that step seat, and it was awful. So I had bought a Seat Concepts tall seat, and in my opinion, it was just as bad as the seat I took off of it. So I have replaced it with the Power Parts tall seat, and this seat is awesome. It's a little bit stiff, a little bit firm in the beginning, but it has really softened up, and I can ride a while on this bike. I mean, on this seat. I did the tall. I'm not all that tall. I'm like 6'1", but I'm also 50 years old, 300 pounds, not in the best shape in the whole wide world. So I went with a tall seat to get my knees to be stretched out a little bit. I've also went with those fabricated pegs. I don't remember who makes them, but they're an inch lower. That really helps. So from sitting to standing on this bike, how I've got it set up is effortless, unlike my 500. Yeah, it's pretty hard on my knees. But so this bike, I just to be honest with you, I've not been happy with it since day one. It's got a lot to be desired when you buy it from the factory, from the showroom floor. It's not, in my opinion, a great bike off the showroom floor. When I first bought it, I'll tell you the story. I had a brand new Aprilia Tuareg 660 that I bought, and the only thing I did to it was put handlebar risers on it, and that bike was amazing from day one. The seat was amazing. The sitting position was amazing. The seat height was amazing. How the bike felt, had decent power. The torque on the bike was a little low, especially compared to this bike. Like I say, there again, I'm 300 pounds. The suspension did great for my 300-pound frame. I just jacked the preloads up on the front and the back, and I never did bottom the bike. And I jumped my bikes. This bike has been in the air a bunch, and the Aprilia was too. So the Aprilia, in my opinion, straight out of the box, if you're going to go buy either one of them, go buy the Aprilia. Straight out of the box, it's a much better bike. Now, the things I've done to this bike to get it to where it's at now, I wouldn't trade it for a new Aprilia if somebody brought me a new Aprilia. In the beginning, I would have. I'd have traded for my old Aprilia back. But now this bike is what it should have been when it left the factory. And I'll tell you the things that I had the problems with, and still have one issue with it starting, and it runs on one cylinder for a little bit, and sometimes it'll quit, and you got to restart it a couple times. Whoop-de-doo. I really don't care about that. That's not a deal breaker for me. When I first bought the bike, the suspension was so stiff from the factory that it literally felt like it had none. It felt like it was riding on. It felt like the shocks, the forks, was 2x4s. It was just awful. So I had to loosen the front and the rear, the rebound and the compression. I had to loosen it way up just to make it rideable. After about 500 or 600 miles, I found myself back to the factory settings. It just loosened up. It just loosened up on its own. And now the bike feels amazing in the suspension department. I mean, it's really, really great. Let's see, the biggest problem I had with the bike from day one, and I've had it back to KTM, and they said, oh, it's just plantation noise. And I'm like, well, what in the world is plantation noise? The front end of this bike felt extremely loose. Now, I've been riding since I was 4 years old, and I'm almost 50 now. I know when something don't feel right. You could hear it making noise. Now, I'm not talking about cruising down the interstate. You can cruise down the interstate all day long with this bike. Let go of the handlebars, and you can ride it 100 miles without ever grabbing hold of the handlebars ever again. I mean, it's just stable as it can be on the interstate. What I'm talking about is you get it on a dirt road, or you get it on even a paved road and hit any kind of bump with it. The front end feels loose. It feels like there's something loose in the front end. So I took it back to KTM. I said, listen, there's something wrong with the front end of this bike. I think it's the steering stem. I think it's the bearings in the steering stem. They feel loose to me, but you could not replicate it. You could not bounce it, pull the front brake in and bounce it and make that sound. So, make the sound, make the feeling, nothing like that. So I've been fighting with that now for 1,500 miles. KTM says it was plantation noise. No, I figured out what it was myself because it was driving me nuts. You go down a dirt road and the whole front end of the bike felt loose. You could feel something jarring in the handlebars. It felt like it was coming through the handlebars. And I figured out what it was. So this is your steering stem nut, and it goes plumb through on a set of bearings, which should be taper bearings. Everybody knows, especially KTM knows, you cannot get by with ball bearings. You can't do it. So this is what KTM had in that steering stem. This is their bearing setup. Okay, this got pressed in the actual frame, and this set in here just like this. With this little ball bearing, there was about, 15, 20 of them, sitting around the edge, just like that, except if you can imagine 15 or 20 of them sitting around there. There was 2 sets of those. That is not the way to do steering stems. You cannot do that. It will not work. On a big, heavy bike like this especially. That, what I just showed you, is how bicycles are set up. So how I found it was I literally put my thumb right here between the frame and the steering stem, okay? And I would press the front brake really hard going down the road. You could feel movement in it. Not a lot of movement. You could not hear it, and you could not feel it in the bars, but you could feel it in your thumb there. You could feel the movement. So I come back home, I put it up on a jack stand, or I put it up on a jack, jacked it up, took it all apart, found a set of Timken roller bearings. They're tapered roller bearings. So you've got to drive the actual seats out of this thing. You got to drive the seats out, a lower and an upper. Drive the seats out, pull it all apart, take your forks off. Everything's got to come apart on the front end. Press new ones in, press new seats in, put your tapered roller bearings in, and boom, the problem's gone. This bike feels like it's supposed to feel now. It feels so much better. That was the major issue I've had with this bike, is KTM did a really, really poor job of engineering that part of this bike. I was talking about how the Aprilia I thought was a better bike out of the box, and I still think it is. The only thing Aprilia does not have on this bike is the engine on this bike is amazing. The power of it, the torque, and the horsepower, man, once you get used to it, I don't think I could go back to the Aprilia now just because I've done got used to this power of this bike. But if you're contemplating a Aprilia versus this KTM and you don't want to do no work to either one of them, get the Aprilia. The KTM needs a lot of work, just to be honest with you. This rear tire has went down about every 3 days since day one, which it is what it is. I'm going to replace a rear tire anyway before too much longer. I did have to plug it. I actually ran a screw. You can see the plug there. I did that not long after I got it. I ran a screw through it, and I thought that was the reason it was going down, but it's actually not. It's somewhere else. Probably it's just not sealing good, I would guess. Besides that, as you can see, I did put a graphics kit on there, and I did that myself, and that was a major job. And well, you can see I actually did a pretty good job of it. I was pretty tickled with that. It turned out really, really well. And I've got the S front fender for it, and it actually with the same color scheme, and it actually looks a lot better with the S front fender on it. So I'm probably actually going to put it back on there. But besides that, I got 1,500 miles on the bike now. After I've got this straightened out, the bike's amazing. After I got the suspension straightened out, the suspension broke in, the steering stem bearings, the head bearings, whatever you want to call them. After that's fixed, the bike really is amazing now. Yeah, it's really amazing. So I'd recommend the bike. It's just know when you get it to make it 100% right. You're going to have to do some work to it. I seen on Big Rock Motos, he just bought a new 890, and he was talking about, it's got 68 miles on it or whatever miles on it, and the steering stem already feels loose. I'm gonna have to tighten it up. No, it felt loose on mine from day one. You tighten it up, and two miles later, it felt like that again. So all you 890 guys, just go ahead and do yourself a favor. Pull it down, drive the old races out of it, get you a set of Timken bearings, put you a new set of Timken bearings with a new set of seals, and be done with it. Besides that, it's a great bike. Y'all have a good one.